Hi there, welcome to another episode of Brave New Leaders, where we discuss how to make better strategy. Now, strategy execution is one of the things that leaders and organizations complain most about. So how to successfully execute a strategy. They complain about execution not working. And what I observe usually is that leaders have worked for a couple of months on the strategy, and then they do a couple of town halls. There is a communication, maybe a page on the intranet, a couple of posters with the strategy pillars, and then they think that is it for execution. Now, obviously, this does not work. My name is Mark Snoekers. I'm a strategy advisor. I have been a strategy advisor for 20 plus years, helping CEOs and their leadership teams to make and execute better strategy. And in this episode, I'll share my strategic management architecture, as I like to call it, which will help you to implement and execute your strategy successfully. So when it comes to strategy execution, a couple of things that you want to think about, a couple of questions that you want to ask yourself. Now, the first question is, how are you going to steer strategy execution? So how are you going to make sure that as a leadership team, as a strategy team, you actually stay up to date what's happening when it comes to your strategy, and how can you influence that? How can you take action? Now, when steering strategy, there are basically three key questions that you ask yourself. The first one is, are we doing what we committed to doing? So you have a plan, you have committed to taking some action, putting some stuff in place. Are you actually doing it? Are you implementing what you said you're going to implement? Second question, are the things that you're doing leading to the results that you were planning for, that you were hoping to see? So in other words, is your strategy working? Do you see progress towards your strategy? Now, obviously, this is something that you might not be able to evaluate immediately in the beginning, but you can have some leading indicators. Maybe think about stuff that's going to point towards, okay, we are on the right track and we're achieving what we said we're going to achieve. Third question you have to ask yourself is everybody still on board? So what is the mood about strategy in the organization? Are we still all aligned? Has everybody actually the same view on what the strategy is? What are people talking about when it comes to strategy? Now, if you go through these questions, you might need to ask yourself, okay, if stuff is not going well, you have to ask yourself, what is happening? What is keeping us from doing these things? Why are we not implementing? Why are we not seeing the results? Why are people not aligned with strategy anymore? And then obviously you need to adjust and so come up with some actions that you put in place, some interventions that you execute. So that's the first thing you have to ask yourself. How are we going to steer strategy? The second thing you have to ask yourself is, how are we going to break down the strategy? How are we going to bring the strategy into all the departments, all the functions, and all the teams? So ideally, at the end of the day, what everybody in the organization does aligns to your strategy. I very often hear people complain about, well, I don't have time for strategy because there is daily work. Obviously, you want to close this gap between strategy and daily work, and you do that by making sure that every function, department, or team has its own kind of mini strategy which aligns to your overall strategy. So, for example, if in your overall strategy you say, key capability we need is people in development with special IT skills, then obviously you want your HR strategy team to be, your HR team to be aligned to that, and whatever they do in recruitment, in training and so on, needs to be aligned with those capabilities. Same if you say in your where to play, you focus on a particular customer segment, or you maybe go after a new customer segment. Obviously you want that priority to be represented in whatever your marketing and sales strategy looks like. So these things need to be aligned. And in one of the next episodes, I'm going to talk more about how you can actually do that. But it's something you need to think about. How can we make sure all the strategies and all the activities throughout the organization are aligned to the overall strategy? The third thing you need to think about is, if you look at your strategy and you think about your organization's capabilities or capacity to implement that strategy, you need to think about, what can the organization actually do in its business as usual, in the structure as it is, and where do we need special strategic initiatives? To give you an example, many companies these days say we need digital transformation, we need digital innovation, we need digital capabilities. Now, obviously, it's in most cases something that does not exist yet in your organization. So your HR team doesn't have digital capabilities, your finance team doesn't have digital capabilities. So this goal, achieving this goal of digital, is not something that you can do as business as usual in your usual ways of working with the capacities and the capabilities that you have. So you need a specific initiatives for digital transformation. So if you think you need something like that, obviously you need to set that up. You need to organize these initiatives to make sure that these things get implemented, and also track whether you're making progress on them or not. The fourth thing you need to do is think about how can we bring strategy to the entire organization. So how are we going to communicate strategy to the entire organization? How are we going to involve and enable the entire organization to be able to implement the strategy? So here we have the typical town halls, the communications, maybe the Q&A sessions, maybe some training on the strategies. This is what most organizations are actually good at doing. So how are you going to communicate the strategy? How are you going to involve the entire organization? And then the last bit is you have to think about how are you going to evaluate everything that's happening. How are you going to monitor your strategy? So you can think about it as a sandwich. So on top you have the steering, and then you have the cascade, the initiatives, and the communication in between, and then on the bottom, as kind of like a frame, you have the monitoring. And obviously the monitoring should relate back to your cascade, your initiatives, and your communication and your involvement, and whatever you get out of that has to loop back to the top level of the steering, so that you can make and take your actions. So you want to make sure that you're tracking how is the cascade working. So that could be you define which departments have to present their strategy to an executive board until when, and then out of what they presented you might have some metrics. Same for the initiatives, and same for the communication and the alignment throughout the organization. So you can set up sounding boards, for example, to get some ideas on the mood of regarding strategy in the organization. You can set up if employee experience is important, you can set up something like an employee NPS, so you can have a customer NPS, and all these kind of things. But at the end of the day, that's what you want to do. So to wrap it up, you want to think about how are we going to steer strategy. You're going to think about how are we going to align department, functional, team level activities to the strategy. You have to think about how are we going to support special initiatives. You have to think about how are we going to communicate and involve everybody in strategy. And finally, you have to think about how are we going to monitor whether we are doing what we said we did, and whether it is leading to the results that we wanted to see. So thank you for watching. I hope you found it helpful. If so, make sure to like, subscribe, and share with your friends and colleagues. Let's work together to make better strategy. See you next time.